Good afternoon. My name is Eileen Madreen, and I have the honor to serve as the Chief Data Officer for the Department of the Air Force. And today, I'd like to welcome you to our Mission Capability Area session on data management, software engineering, cloud, AI, and analytics. Digital engineering and computer modeling can mean new weapon systems and platforms can be tested and demonstrated even before they fly. Digital twins accelerate weapons development process and actually shorten the learning curve. Advanced manufacturing takes these digital models, combines them with new analytics, and really continues to accelerate change. So joining me today, I have three industry leaders in the field. Mr. Aki Jain, the Chief Technology Officer at Palantir Technologies, Mr. Brandon Harris, the Director of ISR Solutions at Dell Technologies, and Mr. Bob Audet, who is the Director at Guidehouse, leading the data management team at Guidehouse. I'd like to take a moment and ask each of the gentlemen on our panel today to introduce themselves briefly to the team. Aki, can you go first?
Sure, thanks, Ms. Vadrine. Thanks for having us on this panel. Really appreciate the invitation. My name is Aki Jain, or Aki, everybody calls me. I've been at Palantir about 16 years and really kind of focus on our early stage 0 to 1 investments in R&D and our internal investments that are kind of thinking about the next set of problems coming over the horizon and how we can actually bring solutions to government to solve them. I'm also dual-hatted, so I do serve as president of the USG business, which means I get to take our best and brightest that are working on those hard problems and apply them to the most important mission to the company, which is that of the United States government.
Awesome. Brendan?
Sure, I'll go next. First, I want to say, if you haven't picked up your buzzword bingo cards, they are all in the back. We're about halfway through, and if you don't have your card yet, you're already behind. I'm Brendan Harris. I'm a retired Air Force intelligence officer. Been with Dell about 2.5 years. And if you're not familiar with Dell's end-to-end digital solutions, we are far more than just laptops and servers or storage. Probably need to spend some time with you to help explain that, but full up end-to-end digital solutions.
Bob Audet, Director at Guidehouse, which is a next-generation global consultancy of over 10,000 management strategy technology consultants across the globe. We are based out of Virginia, and I am a data management subject matter specialist and lead at Guidehouse with over 24 years of advising chief data officers and data leaders across numerous different industries. Published in the industry. I also spoken numerous times at the MIT Chief Data Officer Symposium with other global data leaders. Very excited to be and honored to be on this panel, not just because I'm passionate about the topic, also a son of an Air Force veteran. So I'm definitely very excited about this discussion.
Well, this is great. So first, I'd like to ask the audience that if you have a question to submit, please text your question to the number that you find on the screen. But let's go ahead and get started. Okay, and I'm going to give you the first question. It says, what are some of the leading public sector and commercial data management practices that the Air Force can draw upon to successfully execute against the DoD data strategy?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think as I reflect on this question, I think there's three key pieces I'd like to highlight. One is, and I will go into a little bit more detail on each of these. One is focus on the mission. Two is enable airmen with the right data capabilities. And the third is manage change. So I'll touch upon really each of these because I think they're very instrumental. And I reflect on an interview that I had recently with a federal defense CDO who said that data for data purposes is like the antimatter. It just doesn't exist. And this really gets to the heart of the point of the first point, which is focus on the mission. Because data management capabilities, they just don't exist by themselves. They need to exist to enable mission and operational information needs. So I'm sure there's many of you in the audience that day in, day out are asking or trying to get certain questions answered, trying to help share data with other individuals. That is at the heart of what we need to focus on first. Focus on what those information needs are, then build the appropriate data management capabilities to enable that. That's really point number one. The second point is similar to if you were to send airmen out on a mission, you would ensure that they were equipped with all the necessary information or other materials to be successful. And data has arisen as one of those things that is critical to supporting that mission, be it whether you're in an operational role or you're out on a mission. And so what that really means is enabling the different actors across the data lifecycle to better use that data. So initially we think of data engineers. Data engineers are there to ensure that they prepare that data for those that need to analyze it. They are the ones ingesting the data from various different sources. So how do we best equip them to be successful? Similarly, for data consumers, we also need to think about what are the right tools that they need to be successful. And as we think about accelerating the change to be able to equip these individuals, there are a few things that come to mind. One is consolidated metadata management. And really what that means is it's equipping each of these different actors with the right sets of metadata across the life cycle. So for data engineers, well, where is the data coming from? Where is the quality of that data? How do I get access to this data? For data consumers, it's about knowing what data assets even exist within the organization and how do you gain access to that data? When's the last time it was updated? Sometimes these are just simple questions that I'm sure some of you in this room grapple with each day is like, well, I didn't know that data existed. Consolidated metadata management across the lifecycle will absolutely help to accelerate people's understanding of the data, triaging issues and downstream impacts when data changes. The other part of this is data platform and data democratization, and is really enabling data as a service so that it can be rapidly deployed across the entire enterprise. And that could be done through better APIs. It can be, I think the data platform and data as a service, there's multiple different components that ultimately go into that. And then the other part of that is about making sure that the data that we enable for the airmen, that there's an abstraction layer. So whatever platforms are established, that there's an understanding so that airmen can self-serve and use the data, providing the right sets of tools, be it analytical tools, be it reporting tools, but really meeting people where they are and the roles that they're in with the right sets of tools and the right data that they can trust.
Thanks, that's great. Aki?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of double down on the first point, the mission piece, I think it's really critical that we just center ourselves. Data management is a means to an end. Ultimately, what matters is the outcome. So the question I think you need to ask yourself every day when it comes to considering, the DoD data strategy, the data decrees, and kind of the work is literally, on a given day, what did I do today with data that actually moved forward the mission that I care about? What am I going to do tomorrow with data that moves forward the mission I care about, right? The technology is there. The technology exists. The Air Force has excellent technology that can leverage. It also has excellent governance frameworks that are helping create things like the metadata catalog, and those are only improving. But if every day we're working in the data, leveraging the tooling, building our proficiency and our efficacy, that's actually the thing that most matters. And vis-a-vis data management, what we see in the commercial space, which is about half of our business, is what are you actually doing for the mission, for that business, to create value for it on a daily basis? And as long as you do that, the rest will follow.
Thank you. So Brendan, I'm going to give you the next question, okay? So, because we have like a ton of them coming in from the field.
Okay.
What challenges does industry face in trying to bring capabilities into the DoD and specifically the Department of the Air Force with two services, both Air and Space Force?
All right, so let me start off by saying that was really good, and that's hard work, and it's not necessarily all that sexy, and that's one of the things that is a challenge, is convincing people that they need to invest in those parts, not necessarily just the shiny visualization tools or the predictive modeling capabilities. That's great, that's an end product, but the basic plumbing, the governance, the functions that we just talked about, those are really important and need investments. In terms of impediments, a couple have come immediately to mind. The first one is policy. Aki just said that the Air Force has excellent technology. That's true. We could have better. You all could have better technology, if not held back by policy. The policy structure is slow, is non-responsive. I think I'm not alone in saying that, but that's the fact of the matter. And frustratingly, our opponents do not suffer this same policy restriction. So they don't have to wait for the approvals that we have to wait for. Second, culture. And two things come to mind with respect to culture. I think probably all of us, we were talking earlier about our different, varying experiences, but each of us had examples of not invented in my patch, not invented here. I was given an example of at Dell, we're working with at least 4 different organizations that are working this one specific problem set, and we try to link them, and they're not necessarily interested in the collaboration piece. It's almost like they're more interested in protecting fiefdoms, which is wasteful. Then there is the, that's really hard culture as well. And sometimes those people mean well because they're going to follow the rules. They are going to do their best to make sure there are no security violations, so they're absolutely unwilling to take any risk. But new technology requires us to sometimes take risks and push the boundaries. So those are a couple of things right there. I also want to talk about stovepipes. Being a former intelligence officer, I'm sure I was guilty of overclassifying some things at some times. Maybe, I hope not, underclassifying those things. That is historically one of the things that the intel community has to overcome. I would also say there are others who are guilty of that as well. I'm thinking specifically of special access programs. Somebody once told me, not too long ago, that if your SAP is so secretive and you are so unwilling to share that data, it may be tactically irrelevant. And so we need to get to a point where we're better able to share information, and stovepipes, don't help there. And then there's also proprietary stovepipes. Because industry wants to protect their intellectual property, they create those stovepipes, and we really have to get beyond that with open standards, for example.
So Bob, do you want to add?
Just a brief point on this one.
Sure.
So one thing to highlight, I think, is around change management. Given the pace of change and resistance to change that new data capabilities and advancements in technology are going to introduce, while change management's not a new concept, I think the importance of it cannot be underestimated. And especially when we talk about this topic and some other resistance, because as new data platforms are introduced, it's going to represent a change. And each of us need to be aware of what it is, understand the value to you and the roles that you're in, be equipped with the right sets of training and enablement mechanisms, and even look at how we incentivize people to ensure that data is woven into our daily jobs and our annual performance goals.
So I think I want to pull the culture thread because I'm looking through all of these questions here, like fast and furious, and there's so many focused on culture. I like to say the tech stack is the easy part, even though sometimes it's not easy. But so if culture is the critical factor for us to accelerate change, what aspects should we be thinking about to make sure that culture supports the strategy, which supports the implementation? And I would caveat that there's a question in the queue that says, finding the right data is like finding a needle in a haystack, and we're drowning in data. What can we do to find the right data at the right time to accelerate the mission?
Do you want me to hop in there?
Sure.
Sure, happy to. So one thing culturally, first off, just to kind of talk about risk for a second. I think right now, in our experience at Palantir, we see the government take a lot of risk, actually. But all the risk they take is in the outcome, not in the process whereby which we get to that outcome. So when you're doing fundamentally innovative things, when you're doing new things, when you're trying new things, you have to take more risk in the process. And there are some good initiatives that try to do this. AFWorks has been pushing on this for a while. There's SIBRs or other approaches. to try to get at some of that innovation, certainly from smaller organizations and companies, to try to take more risk in ultimately the process. But even when the Air Force takes risk in the process, you end up in that, the canonical, buzzword bingo, the valley of death, if you will, between taking that innovative prototype, that initial thing, and moving it into a program where it can actually be kind of programmatically planned for over a period of time. And a big part of that is because, hey, we planned for next year like 3 years ago, right? So we're on a path, and it's kind of hard to disrupt that path. So I'd say, like, culturally, enabling the Air Force to take risk in the process, more risk in the process, and then be willing to actually say, yeah, we did have that plan for next year that we made 3 years ago. How do we actually change that? Because we have new information, right? This is all about taking the information we have new experiences. How do we use them to inform what we're going to do kind of in this coming year? That's kind of the first piece. And then I think kind of, building to that point of, hey, data is so hard to find. How do we actually make it easier to find and leverage it? At the end of the day, I would go back to kind of my first thing. The way you actually build that is by using data. Actually, a lot of the data that's out there may not be relevant. It may not be important. But by actually using data and building those systems, right, the things that right now you're doing in SharePoint or PowerPoint or elsewhere, kind of that stuff's living in those silos. You have to say, hey, we're not going to use that for these purposes anymore, and we're going to push down this path whereby which when we use data, we're going to take the actions that make it easier to discover and leverage and do that in some kind of enterprise capability so that then the data can actually be useful to the next person. So you don't, just like you have 4 different programs going after that same project, you also have at least 4 different people on a given day probably going after the same data, and it's just a ton of wasted energy and a ton of wasted time doing that. And at best right now, we capture that in an email exchange, maybe. Right? So how do we actually kind of break that part of the culture and say, like, if I'm going to do an incremental piece of work in a given day, I'm going to do it in a way that actually enables the enterprise to leverage that unit of work, not just the 3 people on my distro or the 3 people that, I sent a chat message or something with that document to. And that's kind of like a very hard thing to break out of because we're also relying on the tools and technologies we already use to really set them aside and kind of embrace the new is kind of the other piece of culture I think needs to change to actually improve on things like data legibility.
You forgot the amazing spreadsheet. That's the magic spreadsheet that's on the airman's desktop. Yeah. That is the last 15% to the puzzle.
And yeah, and as soon as they move into a new position and that account gets shut down and then it's gone.
Brendan, what are you thinking?
Well, I just was working with one of the combatant commands, Unified Combatant Commands, and that's exactly how they track their force posture, is by spreadsheets, all up and down the chain of command. At least that's what I was told, which is shocking, right? Anyway, back to your question, how can industry help? A couple of thoughts. We understand that you all are drowning in this deluge of data, and that we owe you all some help in terms of figuring out which is the wheat and which is the chaff. We also probably need to help you in trying to figure out how long you need to keep that data. Now, granted, I work for Dell, and we sell storage, so we're happy. Like, if you want to store it all for 10 years or whatever. But that's probably not the smartest way to spend your money. So we do owe the answers there. One of the things that also occurs to me is that we could help do a better job with tagging the data at the sensor source. There are platforms, the F-35 comes immediately to mind, that does a pretty good job at that, but not all of our platforms, not all of our capabilities are built like that. And so in the future, they need to be, as an example.
Bob?
Sure. I'll add 4 brief points, and this is more based on some recent research that I have done in speaking with about 6 or 7 CDOs from around the globe. A decent number of them were federal CDOs, and I think I distilled the research and insights down to 4 key points. One of them was around engagement, and it's engagement of senior leadership and also what I would call data ambassadors or business data stewards in listening to the pulse of, like, what are the information needs or the challenges that people are having is one key piece. The second was around focusing on business value and impact. And in this context, it's not just about solving the monolithic problem It's about trying to identify, yes, high-impact business use cases and trying to chip away at some of the smaller problems that build toward a broader vision, which will build credibility and it'll enable new capabilities. The other thing was around behaviors. And one of the things around behaviors, especially for those in leadership positions that manage and enable capabilities, is around listening. It is about being practical, pragmatic. Yes, we want to accelerate, but there needs to be some level of patience with building out some of these capabilities. And then the third thing which emerged was data literacy. And a centralized data operation can only do so much. And we really need to enable individuals in this room, individuals and other airmen that use data on a day-to-day basis with the right sets of data skill sets to interpret data, to be able to ask the right questions so you know what data to use. These are some of the 4 things that emerged out of that research.
Ms. Vadrine, can I follow up on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that last part I want to follow up on because I was remiss. I didn't talk about training. We absolutely need to do a better job preparing. Our end products need to be ready for people to use. We can't just throw them out and say, hey, Airman, Guardian, figure this out. There may be some capabilities like that, but we need to do a better job of training them. We need to do a better job of using them in large force employment exercises. One of the things that would be involved in that is in building trust as we feature new software that is going to result in using data. We need to keep the data provenance internal to that. It needs to be at an airman or guardian's fingertips so that that trust can be built. It may not be on the screen, but they need to have access to it to understand where the data came from, how it was manipulated, what changed it, what affected it, how it affected other things.
I appreciate that because there's a lot of questions on the tablet streaming in about really digitally responsible trajectories moving forward. And I think that, so if you're going to invest, because we're all in the war on talent right now, how do you make sure that you bring in the best, and where should we be looking for in terms of upskilling our workforce right now, specifics?
I'm happy to grab that. So in terms of upskilling, there's kind of 2 things I would think about, and one goes a little bit to the not invented here piece. First and foremost, we should be taking advantage of, we should be leveraging every unfair advantage we can from industry to provide the proverbial Iron Man suit for our guardians and for our airmen. First and foremost. So kind of, I think that's a really important piece here. Let's use the best of breed tools, and if there are better ones that come out, let's use those. Thinking through governance and provenance and making sure that ultimately all that data is data the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force owns. All that logic is logic the Department of the Air Force owns. All that work product is work product that the Department of the Air Force owns, can maintain, manage, and ultimately leverage for its mission purposes. And so that's the first thing. Let's get the best stuff from industry. Let's take advantage and use all those unfair things we have that the industry's invested in and leverage that. That's the first piece. On the talent side and on the upskilling piece, I think at the end of the day, you'll hear a lot of different probably approaches to this. For me, again, it always comes back to what problem are we trying to solve, right? And depending on the outcome and the problem that we're trying to solve, we don't need to teach, a particular guardian like, hey, here's how you build a machine learning model, or here's how you do a regression model, or something like that. In fact, it's probably a waste of time, right? But for other folks, for folks that are going to go down that track, and having those career trajectories and actually the ability to understand what a path looks like, kind of as folks go down that digital career path, you need to actually think about, how do I get folks those experiences? How do I do things like industry fellowships? How do I do things like academic fellowships? And how do I get exposed to those areas where I'm going to get work with folks that are on the cutting edge of that to bring it back to the Department of the Air Force? So there's no specific skill set that I would say we have to upskill on, right? I think the most important thing is let's be very transparent and open. What is the problem we're trying to solve? How do we work from that problem backwards towards the technologies that are useful? And those technologies are areas through the career pathing and other things that we can definitely invest in and upskill folks on and go from there. That's kind of been our experience. If you get into the root of the problem and you work side by side with someone, the actual skill set comes along very quickly as long as you have great tools to enable them.
Yeah, I'd focus on the education rather actually than the training side of the house. Teach them how to think rather than what to think. Spend your time on critical analysis. Use technology to augment skills. I mean, I'm thinking about the utility of augmented reality goggles and how you can make a 3-level much more effective or a 5-level much more effective, much faster by something like that, which would be, just technology enabling these airmen.
Yeah, I think the one other piece to add to this is really thinking about each role in the organization and sort of stepping back and saying, okay, and that individual's day-to-day or that group of individuals that are performing similar activities, what type of data skills should they have? And then thinking about, well, how do we best equip them and what types of skills do they need? Is it data engineering because they're trying to manipulate data and integrate data? Is it data quality because they're trying to improve the health of the data? Is it analytical skills and visualization skills because that's what they're trying to do? Or is it asking the right questions and knowing how to interpret the data to then draw decisions? It really depends on the role that an individual's in. I think is a really important way to look at this. And then also look at more micro-learning type of, we're all busy. And to sort of invest like an hour or two of time to take a training course sometimes doesn't quite hit the mark. So micro-learning is actually, I have found to be a new innovative type of technique to kind of uplift skill sets.
Awesome. So we're going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to ask, what are some of the advanced technologies do you see changing data capabilities in our department, and how do you see it changing moving forward? So.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think at the end of the day, when I really look at the advanced technologies that are out there and the things that the department can leverage, the obvious two things, given the name of the panel, is how do we ultimately leverage our data and the vast volumes of data? Like, we're swimming in data. We don't need more data. I made a Scrooge McDuck joke earlier, and both of them laughed. But it's like we can take the dive into the proverbial vault of data. There's a ton of data there, and actually, Vault's a great example. Vault, the UDL. We have libraries actually that help us understand a fair amount of what data is out there, and those are only improving on a daily basis, let alone initiatives at the OSD level with Advana, right? It's only improving kind of that data continuity across the different services and departments. But what are we going to do with that data? And how are we actually, like, we don't have collectively enough eyeballs anywhere nearby, and certainly not as many as the adversary, to actually analyze all that data. And so AI is, I think, a critical advanced technology. I think there's a lot of initiatives and efforts that are actually making progress there. The trick, though, is how do you get AI out of the lab and on a daily basis take those advanced technologies and put them in the hands of somebody who cares about a problem today? How do you get the feedback from that person back to the folks that are actually developing algorithms? How do you bring the best and brightest from industry, not just the folks that kind of already have studied that problem forever and understand it and are deep experts, but get new perspectives securely and safely in a zero-trust environment, access to some of that data in order to apply their novel approaches to improve and offer more advanced technologies to the department. So you have to kind of think about that full life cycle of how are we going to use those technologies, how are we going to put them in the hands of somebody who cares, and then how are we actually going to feed back from their experiences to improve the thing while bringing the best and brightest, not just those that are captive to the kind of defense industrial or kind of the defense industry. How are we going to bring them to that problem and actually enable them to go do good work on our behalf that we can use to then ultimately have some kind of overmatch vis-a-vis the adversary?
Bob, do you want to go next?
Sure. To look at it from a slightly different perspective, around this whole notion of advanced technology, what there is today is going to be different tomorrow. And I think this is more of a question, in my opinion, given the rapid pace of evolution of technology, of how can the Air Force actually enable and adopt new technology? And I think part of that comes down to process. Is there a process where you can identify new innovative or business problems where innovation can solve that problem? And how you prioritize those, how you incubate those ideas, and how you then accelerate and scale them for broader usage. The other is around budget. Are you earmarking actually funding to be able to do innovative exercises and activities? Do you have an innovation lab where you can, or in conjunction with another third party, to be able to do some of this innovation that you can then scale? Do you have executive leadership that's championing the usage of innovation in your day-to-day jobs? Innovation days, as an example. I mean, I think these are a few things. It's more of just kind of stepping back from this and saying, well, what do we need in place to be able to actually effectively take advantage of tomorrow's advanced technologies?
There are a lot of things that we could talk about. I know we only have a few minutes. So we have industry, not just my organization, but industry has so many exciting things. I'm actually really jealous of people who are still in uniform now because of the data that they have access to and the tools and the capabilities that all of those things bring. There are advanced processors. There are new algorithms, new software, visualization techniques. There's better access to that data than ever. And in some cases, you don't even need the access. With federated analytics, you don't even need access necessarily to the data itself. Of course, there are some difficulties, but the technology is there for folks to do a lot of things that we never have been able to in the past. I want to bring up actually two challenges. Bob mentioned one of those, and that's scale. Bringing those capabilities, making them operational and operationally relevant, that's daunting. And then doing so at scale, that's also daunting. A couple of things that keep me awake at night.
Okay, so we have amazing questions coming in the field, and we're not going to get to all of them. I'm glad you talked about experimentation because we had many questions on experimentation, so thank you. But what should the relationship between commercial data management capabilities be and the Department of the Air Force? How do we make that work better?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's probably a little bit of a repeat of prior, but I think it's, one, we got to take more risk in the process and make sure the aperture's open to a lot of new technology and bring the best, brightest of industry alongside our government kind of partners. Two, at the end of the day, the thing that most matters is the outcome, and I think oftentimes we get stuck on the inputs. So, we're stuck on, hey, do we know a particular skill, or, hey, I like this or I like that, or some version of kind of an input-oriented approach. What really matters is you taking commercial data management capabilities and leveraging them for your mission purposes is, do you achieve the outcome? Do you achieve it on an accelerated time frame? Are you taking advantage of everything that's out there that you can potentially find and use to solve your mission? And the more the technologies are doing that, while ensuring that the Air Force always owns its data, owns its logic, owns the derivative data, and owns the work product, and knows that it's not locked in any way to those pieces, the better, right? Because then the Air Force can continue to accelerate. When that next technology comes along, the Air Force can adopt it, and it has all its work product and all its history, and it can move forward. And that provenance and kind of the pedigree and lineage of that data is kind of carried with it. And so I think that that's kind of the most important thing. It's, let's not get stuck on no, but find our way to yes, take more risk in the process while ensuring that we preserve our data rights and our ultimately, the Air Force's work product rights, because that's actually the most important thing to continue to accelerate forward.
I'm going to ask Brandon down there, who, working ISR, what can you add to that conversation?
Boy. Yeah, I mean, the commercial industry in terms of ISR has a lot of capabilities. Maybe not so much in terms of collection that would eclipse what the Department of Defense or the federal government can do. What I'm thinking about more is in terms of analytical capabilities and best practices. There are a lot of those things. What I was thinking about as Aki was talking is I think we really need to do a better job of thinking like a team. We need to find ways to trust each other better and communicate more openly. I can tell you, after I've been retired for 5 years, and sometimes talking with the federal government is a struggle. And I didn't expect to see that on this side. There can be walls, and there shouldn't necessarily be. I understand why they're there, because people have made mistakes in the past. But that could be something that we could also do, is break down some of those walls to act more like a team. Again, our adversaries don't suffer with that same limitation.
Okay, so now we have a lightning round question, because we're getting close. When we move from strategy to execution, what approaches should we be doing to really commit resources? Resourcing's tough, so we need to know how industry does it.
Yeah, no, resourcing is super. I don't know, Bob, if you want to lead us.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think firstly it comes down to what's the strategy, and subsequently what are the proposed strategic investments and projects and the types of roles that are needed to support those, and when are those things. We can't anticipate everything, but we should be able to create a vision of some executable roadmap that clearly states we need these many data engineers with these types of skills, we need these types of data scientists that know R, Python, this, that, or the other type of technology. And we should be able to create that level of visibility. And what I typically would call, and having worked with other CDOs, more of like a data management office that would clearly understand the portfolio of projects, those resource needs, and then take a multi-pronged approach to source for that talent. There's developing the skills internally, which we already talked about. There's then hiring new people, which that can take time. And then there's using strategic partnerships, which that can take time too, because procurement sometimes can take their time to be ultimately awarded to provide the resources that you need. But I think the key piece is the roadmap and the types of roles you need.
Okay.
Can I add one thing? So just a slightly different take on it. Let's use a real example, right? So we saw the DoD data strategy come out not too long ago from Mr. Spurk at kind of the OC level, and had a lot of really important things. What was so interesting was how quickly actually they moved to ADA, right? The DepSecDef's ADA program, the AI and Data Advantage program. It wasn't a strategy that took 5 years to put together, was out of date by the time it was published, and then took another 5 years before it moved into some form of execution. Further, kind of if you look at what's happening with ADA, as I understand it, the whole point that it's grounded in the reality of the warfighter, right? It's going to the Unified Combatant Commands, and it's saying, hey, we're going to ground our data strategy and those initial kind of investments, at least from the DepSecDef level, in our business strategy, the thing we do as a department, the thing that we are entrusted with, the safety and security, deterrence, competition, in the worst case, ultimately, defending and defeating the adversary. The time between when that strategy was published and how quickly it moved to, all right, let's go do something that's grounded in the business strategy, I think is a great example of actually seeing kind of the strategic move to execution and tackle execution very quickly in a way that'll be a great way for the department to learn.
Well, that's awesome. So that's all the time we have today. I'd like to, thank our panelists for this awesome conversation, but I'd also like to thank all of the amazing questions that came in from Airman and Guardian all across both in the room and beyond, because I think it helped make our conversation a little bit better. Our final session will kick off at 4:30. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, gentlemen, again for this amazing conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.